Can he change? This is the most asked question in my private forum. Because you've already tried to change yourself to accommodate him all these years, to make him happy, to keep him from hurting you, and that didn't work. So the next question is, what about him? Can he change? What you're really asking is there hope? I want to invite you to join me for a totally free workshop on Thursday, August 29th called the Can He Change Workshop. We're going to meet on Zoom at 7:00 p.m. Central Time. I'm going to teach you what I know about whether or not your emotionally abusive husband can change and what you can do about all that hope that part of you is hanging on to. To join me, just go to flyingfreeworkshop.com to sign up. If you're already on my mailing list, you'll get a personal invitation from me in your inbox. Come find out what's possible in the Can He Change workshop by going to flyingfreeworkshop.com, and I will see you on the 29th. Hi, this is Natalie Hoffman of FlyingFreeNow.com, and you're listening to the Flying Free Podcast, a support resource for women of faith looking for hope and healing from hidden emotional and spiritual abuse. Welcome to episode 290 of the Flying Free Podcast. Today's episode is totally different from anything we've ever done before, so I need to set this up so that you have a little bit of context here. I have two programs for Christian women. One is called Flying Free, and it's for women who are in emotionally abusive marriages. It walks them through education and support and coaching, all the way from the moment they begin to wake up to the reality of their situation, all the way through to when some of them end up finalizing their divorce and beyond if they need that kind of support. I don't tell women to get divorced, by the way. I know some people think, oh, I think this program is like, if you want to go get divorced, then join this program. I mean, yeah, if you want to get divorced, we will definitely help you and support you through that. But I don't teach people, yes, you should come in here and get divorced. However, I do teach that women are biblically free to divorce if they choose to pursue that route. But not everyone does this. Many women stay for different reasons, and they learn in Flying Free, they'll learn how to change their programming and find inner peace and freedom, even if their external circumstances are unchangeable at present. So that's Flying Free. Now, after a few years of running that program, several women, they ended up getting divorced and they wanted to keep going. So I started a program for them called Flying Higher, which is a bit different from Flying Free in a few ways. First of all, it's only for divorced women. It's not for women who are going through a divorce. That would be Flying Free. Flying Higher is for women who are all done with their divorce. The divorce papers have been finalized. So while both of these groups, Flying Free and Flying Higher, share the same private forum and the same weekly coaching opportunity, they both have totally different curriculum. I taught completely different classes in Flying Higher to those women than I did in Flying Free. And they also have different live events each month. In Flying Free, those women will meet once a month for a sisterhood gathering on Zoom, and where they break down into small groups to discuss a concept that we teach in Flying Free. And also Flying Free members get a live Q&A every month where they can ask questions. Sometimes we'll even bring in a special guest for that. Whereas in Flying Higher, the courses are more related to rebuilding your life after divorce, and they cover more advanced topics that actually build on the foundation that we lay in Flying Free. So Flying Higher members meet 4 times a month. It's optional, but that opportunity is there for them. We meet 2 times for discussions around the curriculum, and then 2 times for anyone who wants to go through our book of the month with me. So last year, we went through 12 life-changing nonfiction books together. And even for those who didn't want to actually read the book or didn't have time to read the book, they could listen to the discussion replays on our private podcast. And several of them reached out to me and said, oh my gosh, I've learned so much. It's like taking classes, just listening to your discussions about those books. So those book studies are beneficial for everyone, even if you don't read the book. But this year we decided to do something really different and go through 12 fascinating and thought-provoking fiction books together. Now, the book that we went through in June this year was called The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. Now, this would be considered a blasphemous book by conservative Christian standards for many reasons. First of all, and maybe the foremost, is that it portrays a fictional story that explores the idea of what it might have been like if Jesus had been married at some point. Now, the biblical account actually doesn't say one way or the other. So it is speculation, obviously, but it's not actually outside the realm of possibility. Since men in that time period were expected to marry and procreate, and Jesus, according to Christian tradition, Jesus was fully human and fully God, and Jesus fulfilled all of his duties as a fully human man. So why not this one? What if the rampant patriarchy of our world has hidden this part of his story from us? Who knows? Sue Monk Kidd decided to explore this through the eyes of Anna, the wife of Jesus. So that's who the story is told through her eyes. Now, someone told me to read this book. I mean, like they were emphatically hoping that I would read it myself and then have the Flying Higher women read it this year. So much so, I mean, she was so adamant about it that I took her seriously. I listened to it on Audible. I loved it so much. Honestly, it's a book that's going to stay with me for a long time. First of all, it's beautifully written. Sue Monk Kidd is an amazing and gifted writer. So that's one thing. But also, over 2 years of research was put into this book. So you can really get a well-rounded scope of what the socio-political situation of that time period was and what it would have felt like to actually live in the middle of all that chaos as a woman. At the end of the book, the author gives a beautiful explanation for why she wrote this book the way she did. And honestly, I wish I had read that explanation from the very beginning, only because of my upbringing in a very conservative Christian home. There were little parts of me, little younger programmed parts of me, who like the stories I heard growing up because they're familiar. And these parts of me were activated by the idea of Jesus being married. Like my adult self was open to looking at this, like, why not? What can it hurt? This is not a dangerous book. Let's read it. But these other parts of me were like, oh my gosh, this is so dangerous. Jesus wasn't married. We never heard that story. That story was never told to us. So those parts were a little bit activated. But as I read through the book, though, there are so many amazing things to even think about Jesus. We have so focused on the fact that he's God, we don't realize the fact that he was also fully man. And she explores the love that Jesus and Anna shared with each other, which was what you might imagine between two people who both wanted to help the other one discover and use all of their gifts and come into their full potential of who God created them to be. How Jesus related to Anna is how I imagine God relating to us, to each one of us. And it was actually incredibly beautiful and really, I don't know, there was a lot of healing, I think, that took place inside of me when I read this book, honestly. So anyway, our Flying Higher group had 2 really lovely and lively discussions about this book. And today in this episode, I want to share with you a portion of our last discussion because so many incredible themes and things to think about when it comes to love and relationships and women, dreams, birth and death, all the things. They are covered in this discussion. And I think you will be intrigued. And I also believe that you will find many golden nugget takeaways in this discussion for your own life. So here you go. All right. So first of all, let's talk about the characters. And we'll start with Anna. So what do you like about Anna? What are her strengths? What are her weaknesses? What does she represent in this book?
I just think she was, through the entire book, she remained true to who she was. And she kind of questioned the cage that society wanted to put her in. But I love the ending of this book. I absolutely love the ending of this book because at the end, these women came full circle. Even all these people try to set these horrific traps. They were like in bondage. And it was kind of inspirational because we're in bondage in certain ways. We got out of that bondage and now we're kind of free. And I liked her story because it wasn't easy. And it wasn't your happy, rosy kind of oh, she was sitting by the beach sipping pina coladas.
Yeah.
She was at this place in her life where she could use her gifts.
Yes.
And I think that is the beauty of it. I think sometimes in the Western culture, we kind of have this ideology that we're going to be sitting in these huge mansions, sipping pina coladas, having everybody wait on us. And I love that she came to being who God made her to be. And
Yeah.
that's why I like how this book kind of built on her character and never lost that. But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I love that.
I really-
It made me think too about how, how they were in a kind of a community of women, but also ministering. It's almost like, I mean, when you said that, I was thinking about all the survivors who have found each other in different ways, and we minister to each other. And then we go out in our respective communities and drop seeds of hope and love, even where we are. So it's like, Sue Monk Kidd captured that whole thing in such a beautiful way. I love too that she's not married at the end too. Like sipping pina coladas, yes, but
Right.
like happily married and
All,
has a family now. And
all three of these women did not identify with any of those in the ending of their lives.
yeah,
I mean, well, any of the women, they didn't. Their identity was totally theirs through the whole entire story, even though they were,
yes,
sold into marriage. I'm just going to say what it was. It was literally sold into marriage. They didn't have a choice. I mean, Jesus and Anna, that was kind of I love this book just for the simple fact that it just kind of brought God into more of a humanistic kind of viewpoint instead of this evil warlord or warlock, for the lack of better terms, that stands over us with a big hammer.
mm-hmm.
It humanized him. I love the way she did it. And it was a beautiful piece of fiction, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Thank you for, I would never have picked this book up in a million years.
I would never have either, but someone was so excited about it and was like, you have to have the Flying Higher people read this. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, if you're that serious about it, okay.
Well, I'm glad, whoever it was.
Yeah, I wish I could remember. Let's talk about Jesus as a character in a fiction book. It just seems so bizarre.
Well, a lot of people put Jesus in a fiction book. There's a lot of fictional caricatures of Jesus. And, of course, The Chosen is a great example. And that's the big, thing right now, which is a fictional, they want to make it as factual as possible, but they put a spin on Jesus, right? Everybody does that. There's tons of spins on Jesus in lots of fictional settings. If only a glance, right? The glance from the cross, or even if you do the famous old movies about, the centurion or Peter, or, Jesus is in there. So there's been many fictional characterizations of Jesus, but she does some, I think, very different things that, for one thing, I was surprised because, the chosen Jesus is kind of a jovial guy, right? He's got a serious side, but he's kind of a jovial guy, hip jokes, stuff like that. And this guy is a much more severe personality. He's a much more staid, stoic personality, but still that, supernatural caring, that supernatural depth of understanding, the way that he cares for Anna, both outside of and inside of marriage, is uncharacteristic of somebody of that time period, right?
So I love how you said that supernatural. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love how you said that, because that makes a really good point that even though they were showing his humanity, like what a different way of looking at the supernatural God part of him through the eyes of how he would have a relationship with a woman. Mm-hmm. Okay, keep going though.
Yeah, that's all. Just, the components of him, I think, is a unique portrayal of Jesus. I think she did an interesting job.
Well, and even Anna's love for him and how she understood without knowing, she still had understanding that there was something different about him. And she knew from the very beginning that their lives would be different than anything she'd ever experienced.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's something in her heart calling to that.
I just liked how she brought in some different ideas about the construct of Jesus in a marriage to begin with. Is totally, because in the Bible, we just have a few verses about his childhood and then bam, his ministry. We don't really know what happened. I just like that ending, like you said, the ending of the book, how she ties it all in of what might have happened. But she kind of leaves his ministry alone in the book. you're really left to a lot of your own imagination. So she didn't want to get really deep into the religious context of
Yeah.
what we want to believe with Jesus and who Jesus was.
Like the miracles. You notice how you didn't see any miracles or
No,
anything.
she totally did it through the eyes and perspective of a human woman in that time period. And she really tried to tie it in. And she said she did what, like 2 or 3 years of research as far as trying to find what time period it was or was not. Would Jesus have been married? And I guess she said that they were slowly coming off that as, being a disgrace to a family if a male wasn't married. But I thought that fascinating, that the culture that day, if you weren't married, it would have been a disgrace to your family.
One of the quotes that the person who wrote this study said is, although the Christian church that will spring from his teachings will deny women a place of dignity and respect for nearly 2 millennia, that Jesus here listens to Anna, encourages the development of her voice. I love that. He encourages the development of her voice. It's almost like he is setting, and I see that for all of us too. God wants to set us up so that our voice can be in the world and make just as much of a difference as his, because that's who we spring from, God, and takes her counsel at every turn as he moves toward his reluctant acceptance of the dangerous life of an itinerant preacher. Unlike Judas, Jesus preaches a new world brought about not by military action, but rather by humanity reforming. He sees a God that is not here or there, but rather everywhere, in everyone. In that vision lies his tragic flaw, which leads directly to the agony and triumph at Golgotha. We could call it a flaw, or we could call it, there's one, I wasn't going to bring this up till later, but there's this concept of, and the Bible talks about this a lot, of seeds going into the ground and dying and then springing forth. So you see that a lot in this book, things that get buried, things that die, but there's always this promise that that's part of the cycle. That's part of how then new growth comes, and there's more. Like the harvest is always more than the number of seeds that die in the ground. There's always a greater harvest, but there also is a time period between when the seeds fall and die where you're just looking out over your garden, or the farmer's looking out over his field going, if you've never done it before, wondering, is anything going to grow? I mean, you've had kids that are like, is it going to grow? When's the seed going to grow? I remember that. So there's that promise. Okay, let's talk about Judas next. What's his tragic flaw?
I just love how she developed that character. I would have never thought. I mean, if you think about it, in society as a whole, people do things like that to elevate their platforms. They want to start chaos. They want to start some type of martyr, per se, in politics. We see that happen all the time.
Yes.
It's just not murder today. I mean, they literally murder them on the screen now.
Yeah.
So they kind of martyr these people. They're like, okay, let's just start a movement here. Let's get this going. And I never even thought of that Judas maybe was doing that because, it tells him that he threw the money down, because that's what you would do. Because if it didn't spur on this, he was a zealot, and I never thought about that. He could have been, and, throw the money down because you just turned your best friend in.
Yeah.
For the cause. And you're like, oh, snap. It'd be like me turning you in, hoping that your death would somehow free the more women, like Natalie was murdered by these patriarchal men on a cross. And then somehow we're all going to be, heard for the first time.
Yeah.
And things are going to change, and finding out that, oh, Natalie's death was all for, sorry you suffered, Natalie. That would have been just kind of like, horrific. And
right.
Then you see that.
Right.
You see that real human grief by, suicide.
I know. I thought it was we'll never know. Well, maybe in eternity we'll know, but we'll never know here on earth. And yet I think it's a very plausible, even probable motivation for him. There were a lot of Jewish zealots that were doing all kinds of radical things to try to overthrow the Roman government. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why they crucified Jesus too, why even his followers turned on him, not the disciples, they just ran away, but some of his followers turned on him because they were following him simply because they thought he was going to be their Messiah that would, set up his kingdom and be their king. And then when he didn't turn out to do that, they were like angry and frustrated, and you tricked us, and you're just a fraud, and get rid of him, kill him.
Now, in the book, did she say that like Barabbas, the one they set free, Was that like she found out maybe was more like a zealot or something? I listened to the book.
Yeah.
So
I listened to it
which
too.
could have been possible because they're freeing this. I always told they're freeing this murderer and stuff like that. Well, he could have been a zealot easily. To get that
Right.
many people to set a murderer free, always like, why would they? Society even today would not do that. But he had to be somebody important to their cause. And Jesus
Yes.
was more of a pacifist, where am I saying his name? Was more of the guy that they were looking for, the one that was going to slay many Romans,
Yeah.
So who knows?
It
Yeah.
does indicate in the book that Barabbas was a zealot.
Mm-hmm. Which, to me makes actually, even though it's a work of fiction, makes more sense because we don't know. They just said free and we don't know the history. And so all the fiction we've been fed in church about that person, this is just a new line of fiction that
Yes.
actually makes more sense to me when you look at it from a humanistic standpoint than their story. Their story is just paints all men as these evil people, but we're intelligent.
Yeah.
We're calculated. We're going to think of ourselves and our families before we make a decision to free a murderer. So he wasn't just
Right.
a murderer. I think he
Right.
was for the cause, kind of,
Well, the text says, the biblical text says that, that the Romans floated that name and, they planted the name and, the crowd went for it. And probably the crowd did go for it for those reasons. I mean, he had to have some value to the crowd.
Right. And I
Yeah.
never thought of it because we were
Yeah.
always told that he was this murderous, he murdered children. I mean, I don't know how deep the stories went, but there was nothing scriptural about it. But I bought him like he was this horrid, and they chose him over Jesus. Oh,
Right. Isn't that fascinating that we grew up with? I love that you said that. The fiction stories we heard, we grew up with fiction.
We did.
We were told it was fact. So then when we read another idea that was actually based in like at least some research of what was going on at the time and understanding of what maybe people in that situation were probably likely thinking, then we cry out, no, it's blasphemous.
Right. Or, I took a pastor to a scripture and his veins were popping out of his neck when he couldn't read what he was. And I said, well, why is this being taught? And he said, well, it's inferred. And I'm like, well, I'm inferring divorce is okay, but it's actually scripturally okay. You want to go down that route? And he didn't.
No.
I did think it was interesting how Judas was Anna's brother, right? It just brought him that much closer to Jesus, like in just a very strong betrayal way, right? Like it hits closer to home that how could your brother do that to your husband, right? I mean, just
suicidal.
we can all relate to that.
Yeah.
Especially because she saved him.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, why he murdered, Judas ended up hanging himself. I'm like, why did he? Because there was a deep, friendship. It was huge.
Yeah.
You just don't go hang yourself because you accidentally murdered somebody or got somebody murdered or purposely sold them away.
Right. Right. And they just still didn't know. It wasn't like, I was taught that Judas killed himself because he realized he had murdered the Son of God.
Right.
He hadn't rose from the dead yet. They did not believe that he was the Son of God. I mean, they wondered, because he said things like that, but it wasn't like they knew for certain sure that he was what he said he was, especially after he was crucified and he's dead. So Judas wasn't going, oh, he was the Son of God and going off and killing himself. It doesn't say that in the Bible, but that's a story that I heard. So okay, we're going to actually keep going because I want to get to some of these themes that are really very fascinating. The first theme I want to talk about is the power of longing. So it's called the Book of Longings. And I'll start with reading you a quote. When Yaltha presents young Anna with the incantation bowl, we were going to talk about Yaltha too, but I don't think we have time. She tells her, a man's holy of holies contains God's laws, but inside a woman's, there are only longings. Is this content resonating with you? I've written a book for women of faith in destructive relationships called Is It Me? Making Sense of Your Confusing Marriage, a Christian woman's guide to hidden emotional and spiritual abuse. You can read reviews and find out more about my book on Amazon.com. It comes in paperback, Kindle, and Audible formats. I've also created a companion workbook for Is It Me, also available on Amazon. This workbook is like 11 power-packed therapy sessions to help you process through the important material you'll be learning from my book. These books are recommended by counselors and therapists all over the United States. I've also got a website specifically focused on helping women of faith find hope and healing. It's called flyingfreenow.com, and I'd love to give you the first chapter of my book and the first chapter of the companion workbook for free when you hop on my mailing list at the top of my website. Those two resources are going to help you figure out if your relationship is normal or destructive. Now, let's get back to our episode. So let's talk about longings. Just give me your thoughts.
I think culturally, because women, we were always on the coattails of men. Our identity was through our marriage. Our identity was our husbands. And if they allowed us to have our longings met, then yay. If not, then we were just, I don't know. I was pretty much in my marriage told what I had to do and how to act and behave. And so my longings were just that. And yes, I love that quote. It kind of resonates, I think, with a lot of us in our own previous marriages.
Well, somebody put on, I don't know if it was on which place it was on, but it was the clip of the gal who wrote Lessons in Chemistry, and the day she wrote the first chapter in Lessons in Chemistry. Most everybody see that. Okay, I feel like that's a good example of that kind of deep longing. Like, she lived her whole life in the construct of male, whatever, patriarchy or, business office views of women, the same thing that Elizabeth Zott, dealt with. And, then went out from that meeting, which is, totally incredulous meeting, but that happened, that happened. I mean, we've all experienced that, so non sequitur, right? Total gaslighting. And she says, no, I'm going to go write that chapter. So she writes the first chapter of her book. And, these normal, I don't even know if longing is a fair word, because they're normal desires. And then they have to be forced into the position of longings, hopes that maybe one day, possibly, and they're the normal things anybody would want, basically, mutual respect, which some of these characters just assumed, right? So Anna assumed it, Yelta assumed it, the woman who started the society of people outside society, they walked in it, they walked in their longings, really, and they established pathways for other people all the time.
Yeah. So what is powerful about longings?
I think they drive us to what God made us to be, because I would always long that God would release me from my prison. You created me this way. You gave me these gifts, yet I'm, looked down upon in the church because I talk too much. I speak out too much. I'm too bold. I ask too many questions. God, why did you make me this way? And I longed for a period in time where I could be heard. I longed to be heard. And I asked God to free me from that. So yeah, it's just a really,
And
awful.
then you started scanning the horizon for your opportunities to find that which your heart longed for.
Yes. And again, society, marginalized women so bad. And I think we understand what unmet longings are, than our male counterparts will ever.
The longings, in my mind, the way we're talking about it is really, it's like God has gifted each one of us and our potential of who we are, our soul, our spirit, right? And so I think when that is not allowed to, who we are, is not allowed to blossom in the world, then it does become a longing and it kind of feels bottled up. And I think that's a little bit what you're talking about, Julie. And that's
thanks for
that's how I would define, like, it happened back in Jesus's day, and I still think it happens today. So it's something we all experience.
That was beautifully put.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah.
Sometimes our longings get so put away because we've grown up in a culture that our wants and desires are dictated by other people, or we don't even know what we long for. So it becomes almost like a secret longing, even secret to ourselves.
Yes.
But like when I'm thinking about the last moments of my marriage, I didn't really realize how bad I was doing until, it just became unbearable. And I think that was my secret longing kind of pushing me away from something that was not good and not healthy. So these longings can be even secret, at least for me. I think that they're very secret to me because I just haven't always been in tune with them. It's always been deferred to, what do other people want? Well, then that's what I want.
It's kind of like the runaway bride and how she changed what kind of eggs she liked based on who she was with, instead of finding out what type of eggs she really liked.
And rightfully thinking that is, oh yeah, this is what eggs I want. Like, you think that you just stumbled upon it, but that's just because our true desires have not, whatever makes those desires known to us, I don't even know sometimes. So anyway, that's the joy of being away from that culture, is that hopefully the longings have a courage to show up.
Okay, so let's talk about how Anna and Jesus used their longing to change the world.
Well, they have very different kind of longings, right? Like to me, Anna had a lot of gifts that her father begrudgingly supported because she's, basically demanded it, and, for all of her writing and her solitude and the desire to, grow in her knowledge of languages and her knowledge in general and her curiosity. Jesus is portrayed as more reticent, like he has a growing longing that becomes, unavoidable, where she has all these, gifts and abilities and desires to explore the world. And they end up both using their longings provocatively, really, but they have very different, not origins, but they're very different style of the way they're portrayed, which I think is interesting.
Where was Anna's power? Like, where did she find her ability to channel?
Writing.
Yeah. But then what happened? And do you guys remember what her goal was? What did she really want to do with her writing?
To be heard, I think, in a way. That was her way of being heard.
And what else?
And to support other women, right? She
Yes.
the other women that she felt were, what's the word? Not cast out, but kind of lifting up other women.
Yeah.
Somebody might read her stories one day that, culturally will come to a place where they can accept that.
Yes.
She had all those biblical women, right? So she had all those profiles of women that, we're all interested in the same women today. And so that was part of her, even her young person writing in the beginning project of her life.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in the end, what happens to all those stories?
Buries them. She buries them. But I love the very last line where she says, I am a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. She got heard. And I love how this fictional work kind of puts, because they're archaeologically still finding papyruses that are written and buried like this. So, even though it's a fictional work, they have proof that actually people did this.
Yes. So her longing that the women's voices, I love what you said, Ruth, I think, where you said she was waiting for a time when the culture was ready to hear that voice. Was that you who said that, Ruth, or was that Megan? I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's what I was talking about at the beginning. There's that burying concept, but it's not going to stay. She did not bury it thinking it's never, ever going to, the voices are never going to be heard. She buried it because she knew her time period, they weren't ready to hear it. And she buried it in the hope and dream and longing that one day the world would find those and be ready to hear the voice, and that then they could know the truth. Because if someone didn't write it down, how would anybody know about these women? How would anyone hear? She preserved the voices of women in the world. I can't tell you how much I was so thrilled about that ending. And then Jesus, his ending also, what was his longing and what happened to him?
Peace.
Peace, yeah.
And he got murdered.
What else did he want besides peace? What did he want for people?
To learn to love and get along. He had a longing to just bring about change.
I mean, he wanted them to know God in his true form. I mean, he definitely wanted that. So, he had a greater picture than just the political nature of what John the Baptist wanted or what Judas wanted or what other people wanted.
Yeah.
A bigger picture of what that was going toward.
Even think about his relationship with Anna, you guys. his relationship with Anna was like a little microcosm of what he wanted for the world. So talk about that.
I think he was interested in having mutual love, mutual respect, understanding, acceptability, all the things that I think that, again, like Ruth said, reflect the nature of God. So it's like the equality between the two of them together is what he wanted in the whole world, among all people.
Yes.
I had a slight problem with his being absent so much, and that his ministry was the main focus, but she didn't begrudge him of that at all, because they had this mutual understanding of where, like you were saying earlier, Natalie, like he helped her in her longings, and she supported him in his, and they came together, and it was like this mutual knowing of one another, where my husband was, my ex, excuse me, was absent so much, and I would long for his return, and when he got home, I'm like, why did I long for this? Where when Jesus came home, I was like, he was so tender and nice to her. And so it actually triggered me, his leaving and coming and leaving and coming throughout the book.
Yeah.
That's what my ex did. But he was then I was jealous of how he treated her.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you brought that up, because when you think about it, the way we're taught it's a lot of what we expect, our expectations going into marriage have been programmed into us. And it really is a lot of enmeshment when you think about it.
Yes.
Like that we're one flesh, and you're supposed to be having sex all the time, and you're supposed to be with each other, and the man should be. And I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that it's healthy for couples to be separated for long periods of time or anything.
It was for me.
But yeah, exactly. But
you didn't know it.
and she did, when, it did say she did long for him when he was gone, but her love for him, they were so in tune to what one another, the essence of what the other person was, that they wanted to set that other person free to live into their essence. And that to me is like a transcendent love that transcends just what I can get from you. But like, that's what it looks like when you have two people who say, what can I give to you? Both people are like, what can I give to you to set you free? Not so that you become dependent on me, but so that you become all the 100% of everything that you were meant to be, which is really not dependent on another human being at all anyways, and should never be that way. It's an interesting thing to talk about. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And I think you're right, Natalie. It's kind of like our programming in our culture of itself that we're very enmeshed. It's like we can't, you have to be. I was taught that I had to go. I mean, I did his hobbies.
Yes.
Dinner. Everything that I did in my marriage was enmeshed in him. His clock, his schedule. We had our family, our homeschooling life rotated around him. And so that if we had any wants, needs, or desires, they were, the man's the head of the home. And we had to set those aside, where you're right, in this relationship, even though they were separated, it was still very healthy. Because when they came together, they were very respectful of one another, very mutual. And there was this great love that I think I was kind of, throughout the story, I was kind of like, that's what it is. It wasn't just this fictitious longing. When he came home, he's actually a decent guy.
Yeah. And not only just decent, but he didn't, like, when I think of decent, I think of like the bare minimum of, politeness, but he was like, really wanted her to be set free in who she was. You guys, we all have the Holy Spirit of that same Christ inside of us, all 100% of the time, doing the same things inside of us that this book portrayed Jesus doing inside of Anna, which is kind of profound when you think about it.
Well, and I think she captured that when Anna saw him in a vision later, and they had the same cloak on, and then she felt peace.
Yeah.
But then she realized he was inside of her and he was still there.
Yeah. Yes. I forgot about that. Yes. That's exactly it.
Well, if you think about it too, I mean, we all learn about relationships in a broken world from other people that have brokenness and dysfunction. whether it's in the church or in our families of origin. And it's not to excuse the way that we grew up, but I do think, what they're displaying in their love for each other is what God intends in when the kingdom of God comes. Those are the relationships, whether it's a husband and wife or just human to human, another person to another person. That's the beauty of what God's kingdom truly is.
Yes. Amen. Gosh, she's better than church, I'm telling you. Okay. I want to read a quote from this study. It said, the idea that Jesus could fall in love, marry, and have children seems, and this is a quote from the study, tacky and human and out of line with our idea that Jesus was on a mission. I love that they use the word tacky because that's kind of how my initial reaction was. This is kind of tacky. Like, why would they do this to the Son of God? That wasn't all of me. That was a part of me. Gosh, I love IFS as well because it explains so much confusion that's inside of me. But a part of me thought, this is so tacky. And yet the love of Jesus has always been taught as an empathetic spirit that brings dignity and respect to all people, to humans. So to see Jesus as a human, which the Bible says he was, is not tacky. Why would that be tacky unless we, somewhere deep down inside of us or a part of us, looks at humanity and goes, there's actually a big part of me that thinks, oh, humans are so stupid. And so then that part of me, of course, is going to react when you say the Son of God was human. What? He was a stupid human like the rest of us? Very critical. But okay, so here's the quote. The love that develops between Anna and Jesus, however, complements rather than contradicts Jesus as God. It is more than love at first sight, more than marriage and commitment, more than physical love. Kidd expresses Jesus's humanity as a kind of supernal love. The love that defines and unites Anna and Jesus is hardly ordinary. The love celebrates the intimacy of sharing open and honest hearts, of finding in the physical act of love the expression of a far more compelling sense of spiritual oneness. When Anna first sorts through her attraction for the stonecutter that she meets in the crowded marketplace of Sepphoris, Anna uses as her guide the Song of Solomon. The Old Testament canticle celebrates the complex fusion of the sensual and sacred, the flesh and spirit. Despite distances, Anna and Jesus are never apart. The tragedy of their stillborn daughter pulls them closer. The moment when Anna meets the eyes of the dying Jesus at the foot of the cross celebrates a love that is at once deeply secular and profoundly sacred. Much as in traditional parables, Kidd upholds the love between Jesus and Anna as an exemplum of an ideal sort of love. Surrounded as they are by couples whose marriages and whose love are far less than ideal, Anna and Jesus define love based on trust, honesty, communication, sympathy for the other person's sorrows, and ultimately sustained by mutual respect. It is the very ideal love that Jesus tells Anna during their animated conversations about his mission he sees as God's greatest gift to the world, a gift he cannot fathom why humanity rejects. And I cannot fathom why the Christian church, who claims to follow this person, rejects these gifts that God gives to all humans. I don't get it.
I think the Christian church has really taken the idea that humans, the sin of man. So therefore, humans are, what'd you call them, Natalie? Not dumb, icky.
I think I did say dumb.
Tacky.
Yeah.
Tacky.
Tacky.
Tacky. Yeah, they're tacky. So it's ingrained in us because it looks upon that we chose the free will and we chose to do bad. We chose to sin. Therefore, we are all dumb. Takes God to redeem us. Stupid little people.
Yeah.
So I think that's culturally, it's in the church. It's taught to us. But I think that also leads into kind of, again, we have these views of God as abusive.
Yep.
And for some of us, we have to rewire that.
Yes. And the understanding of humans, like even learning about IFS has helped me see my kids and myself as not these bad people. Like when my kids are misbehaving, I can now see, oh, it's not because they're a dirty, rotten little sinner. It's because they have parts of them that are actually trying in the best way that they know how to get their needs met. They're doing it the wrong way or in a way that's going to cause problems for them. So what's my role as a mom to help them, not to shame them and go, no, you're so dumb for doing that. Why would you do it that way? It's not how you get what you want. Instead, to show them like what their good motivations are, what's inside of them that God put inside of them that's actually really, it's like germs or seeds of goodness that the world and what they've been, it's our programming. We've been programmed in ways that ruin, that just take truth and goodness and take those seeds and just like try to destroy them and smash them. So it's getting rid of the programming so these seeds can be free to flourish and grow. It's getting rid of the weeds of lies that we're so surrounded by. People aren't horrible and stupid and tacky. We are in bondage. And getting free from bondage, in our lives, one level of that is just getting out of an abusive relationship. But I'm sure many of you who've gotten out and have I guess all of us, because this is flying higher. We've noticed that once you get out of that bondage, well, there's so many other different ways that we're all still in bondage, that truth is going to ultimately set us free.
I think Tabitha was a perfect example of that bearing and then coming out and blossoming, because she was sold into slavery, escaped, and then ended up at Mary and Martha's and found a way to communicate again and found song again and music. And she just became something beautiful.
Yeah, me too. Okay, we have 10 more minutes and I really want to talk about this last one, which is the last theme that we're going to talk about. There's a fourth one, but I don't think we're going to get to it. The third one is the problematic place of women in Christian theology. Anna's story questions why Judeo-Christian theology has long denied women a place in Scripture. Anna's earliest writings center on her ambitious plan to gift each Old Testament woman a voice, to tell their story, because the biblical accounts neglect the women's story. Women in Christian theology are stereotypes or characters. They are denied status other than dutiful wife, caring mother, or, as is most often the case, an occasion for temptation into sin, which is the threat of sexuality, which is, I think, honestly, the niggling point about people thinking that Jesus might be married, because Jesus can't have had sex because sex is a terrible, horrible sin, which it's not. But that's the thinking. And, Anna understands from an early age that women are far more complicated and far more invested in the Judeo-Christian theology than her culture acknowledges. And for author Sue Monk Kidd, contemporary Christian theology has advanced little from these assumptions. Women here play a pivotal role in the missions of their men, the prophets, who become the defining, iconic figureheads in the Judeo-Christian tradition. To borrow from the metaphor of Anna's own writing, their voices have been stifled, ignored, dismissed. Anna feels that anger when she steps into the vaulted halls of the great library at Alexandria. Quote, I could feel a tiny lump of anger tucked beneath my awe. 500,000 scrolls and codices were within these walls, and all but a handful were by men. They had written the known world. That's a quote from the book. Throughout Anna's marriage, through the loss of her daughter and then the brutal execution of her husband, Anna clings to the power of her place, her assurance that her story has legitimacy and value. Years after her husband's death, even as his message begins to define a mass social and religious movement, she finds her place in that story deleted. Quote, did they believe making him celibate rendered him more spiritual? I found no answers, only the sting of being erased. With Jesus, Anna participates fully in the first steps toward his commitment to his ministry. He shares his vision. Together they are baptized. Together they tend the sick and wounded at Lazarus's home. Together they assess the risks of Judas's political movement. She is there at the foot of the cross at the moment of his death. In Alexandria, in the women's commune, Anna taps into the tonic energy of women committed to the spiritual life of reflection, devoted to scriptural study, and practiced in the arts of expressing that devotion in writing. In the end, Anna buries her greatest work, that is itself a complicated examination of the paradox of women and their place within a cosmos designed by a God able to express itself as both a male and a female principle. Her voice is not silenced. Unlike her mother's or Tabitha's, her voice simply awaits its audience. Do you not just love that?
Mhm.
I'm going to put this whole thing in there because it's not that long. Hers is a voice, she concedes, quote, begging to be born. The burial marks her hope that in time, women will emerge from the shadows. Reactions.
But we're taking our time.
2,000 years so long.
We just call it something different. And
Or
you know.
are we cicadas? This is the year of one of the broods or something, 17 years, and they come out
Yeah.
as
Yeah, it's a cicada year.
Yeah,
I think
so we just kinda-
this is a good example of it, though. I mean, and I think there have been bubbles. Like if you take the women's movement, right, which was made into a pejorative by most of Christianity, whether it was Equal Rights Amendment or whether it was, things that happened in the 20s or the late 1800s, and even today. I was just a conversation yesterday. Well, I can't talk. That's just about, you're just a feminist, okay, again, right? Like, what does that even mean? And so the need to suppress even thinking that women have the right to have equal rights in Christianity is still very strong. That's a wrong way of thinking. It's not a biblical way to think. It's not a, godly perspective and all the things. When they're saying really legitimate, fundamental truths that whether you are both a faith-based person or not, there's things that are true regardless of faith-basedness. And a lot of those truths are part of who God is and the reason why we can speak those things into the world. They're not secular thoughts to say that somebody should have equal value. And whether that's across racial lines or across gender lines or across, but just that whole way of thinking is like radically, liberal. We're still in that space.
Wasn't that fun? If you would like to be part of our community and go deeper with us, consider joining Flying Free. If you are still married or you're in the separation process or you're in the divorce process, Flying Free would be the place for you. You can get all the details by going to joinflyingfree.com and you can complete an application over there. Or if you are already divorced, consider joining Flying Higher. That's the group that you just heard. Those are some of the ladies in that group, and you can learn all about Flying Higher and what that involves and complete an application by going to joinflyinghigher.com. Hey, beautiful butterfly. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe and then consider leaving a rating and review so others can find us. To connect with me and get a free chapter of my book, head over to flyingfreenow.com. And until next time, fly free.